welcome everybody, and there's one word that I think sums up certainly my feelings, I suspect Emma and Helen as well, and that's gratitude. In my case, gratitude for changing, can you hear down the back? Sorry. Is that better? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, changing my life, and really as a consequence of the simple mantra that drives Rotary, and that is service above self. How many Rotarians have we got in the room here today? Quite a few. So thank you for what you did for me, what Rotary did all those years ago. I'll touch on the personal story, but really only to get to the context of the professional and what happened in Nettie, my wife's life with our son Michael, who we lost 20 years ago next year to suicide, and how that also has changed what we do and why we do it, and you wouldn't wish it on anyone, how it actually deepens your humanity.
Rugby is your first introduction to Rotary. You were a bit of a rugger-bugger at school and then went on to play for university. What was the connection between sport and rugby? Oh, sorry, sport and Rotary.
Yeah, sport is something which just I love, and it was very much a driver in growing up and at boarding school. That's what you did, and if you're lucky, you went on with that without being injured, and that took me to Queensland University for courtesy of a study and support as a cadet at BHP. And with the university, we had a good side. I was just a dirt tracker, but we had some folk who played for the country, and we had a coach, a medical officer there who was a Rotarian. And his name was Dr. Kurt Aaron. At one point he simply said, you ought to put your hand up for Rotary Foundation Fellowship for International Understanding. And I said, what's that? And basically it was paying for postgraduate study overseas. And there's no way I could have afforded to do it unless someone else paid. And I put my hand up, was lucky enough to get the awarded the scholarship. They give one every second year, District 260. And the governor there was a fellow by the name of Clinton Renouf, an Australian who went on to become the first and I think only world president of Rotary. And so that's how it all happened.
Oh, right. So you end up at Ohio State University and you work hard and get an MBA, and part of the program at Ohio is to go and talk to Rotary clubs, and there's a lot of banners there, and I love that photo of the pancakes. It's such an American thing, isn't it? You know, pancakes and maple syrup for breakfast, that sort of thing. So what was the impact of meeting all those Rotarians? Because you've learned to, there was a big impact on your value system, wasn't there?
I think, as I said, the whole idea of Rotary and service above self, and the other one was one profits most who serves best, is something that the Americans practiced and lived big time. The can-do approach to philosophy was something I wasn't used to, and the only requirement of giving back from these scholarships was go and talk to the Rotary clubs. And I reckon I spoke to about 40 around America. And you just, Rotary was big then. And it also, its foundation was back in the early 1900s when they devised the mottos and so on, and it got a huge kick along during the Depression. People going back to values. What is leadership all about? What is purpose all about? And you saw that every day that you went into one of these Rotary clubs. They had no idea about Australia, and was often asked, and some of you may have experienced, like, "Oh, Peter, Australia, what state's that in?" And equally, I didn't have much idea about them either, but we laughed a lot, and they're putting back, giving back, not unlike this community here. So I just think Katoomba's magnificent, doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, fantastic. And also, you asked to take a term off university studies to go to Expo in Montreal in Canada. And there was a huge impact on your life because you met your beautiful wife, Nettie, and you've now been married 54 years. 56. 56, says Nettie. Can't get that wrong. Nettie, which one are you in that photo of those gorgeous...
The middle one at the back.
That's Nettie. So that was great that Rotary was able to give you that time to go and have that experience, right?
Yeah, I needed a summer job, and Australia was participating in the Expo in Montreal for the first time as a fully fledged international participant. There was a magnificent pavilion. They did it really well, and again, life-changing in the sense of we're a great group, great buddies, and Nettie and I, that's where we met, and we kept up the communication via postcards, and here we are. But Australia absolutely shone at that time. It was the first direct, and there was an Australia Day event. Each country, about 100 of them there, had its own particular day, and it was the first time there was a direct telecast of anything from offshore to Australia.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. And just as an aside, and asking for a friend, what would be your tips to 56 years of marriage?
Ask Nettie. I don't know, I'm not going to give her a little lecture. I don't know. Be vulnerable. I think I learned, you learn along the way, and you hear it all the time. And, has anyone heard of Ben Crow? He's sort of like a mind coach who became famous when he took on Ash Barty, who'd gone through her, up at the Len, her entire career, one major championship, and started working with Ben, and he really just had two things to say to her. One was treat vulnerability as a strength. I think that applies in marriage as well. Because it does two things. One, keeps you humble, and secondly, it keeps you curious. So you keep wanting to explore, and I reckon, it's a pretty good life strategy doing that, because you develop a mindset, then you don't worry about results, you don't worry, you have a fear of failure, you just explore and be the best version of yourself. That's all we do and say to our kids, and it kind of rubs off back on yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we've now gone to the beautiful Nettie and your wedding day in Sydney, and then you have 4 beautiful children, and you've always had dogs. They've been a big part of your life. One of your daughters trains dogs for the Royal Blind Society.
Guide dogs.
Guide dogs. And there they are as adults, Lucy, Michael, Kate and Amelia. So you mentioned earlier about the tragedy of Michael's death. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah. So Mike, or MJ as we call him, and the kids, the grandkids, call him Angel Michael, because he's still around in our hearts every day. And I guess he was about 15. He came home and he said to his mother, "There's something funny going on in my head." And that's when the roller coaster began. We lost him when he was 30, but it was episodic. It was very much, had lots of good times, wonderful times, shared times, and ultimately we didn't get the answers. I was chairman of St Vincent's for quite a bit of that time, as mentioned earlier. Being there, I had access to all the help, special help around, and we then went looking for another opinion. We had a neighbour in Northwood where we live, his name is Professor Gordon Parker, who saw our MJ and basically changed his life, and at the time very deep and dark, and he had some terrific periods of wellness. And it was during that period, and this is where the connection comes with Black Dog. Gordon rings me up as a business person, and he said, "I'd like to set up a medical research institute, would you help me?" I said, and he was running at that time something called the Mood Disorders Unit, based in Prince Henry, Prince of Wales, fine academic reputation. And I said, "Yeah, I'll help you, Gordon, on one condition." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "That you change the name. Because if somebody told me I was off to the Mood Disorders Unit, I wouldn't tell anyone." He didn't like that much, but as a wonderful fellow by the name of Michael Ayres, who came on our board, his wife Kerry had worked for a very long time with Gordon. He was the one that came up with the name. He'd worked on the Sydney Olympics, and anyway, he came up with the name. I remember driving home one day and got a call from Michael. He was virtually shouting down the phone, "I've got your name, I've got your name." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "The Black Dog Institute." I said, "Yes." And it's gone on from there. Little did we know is that when we launched it in 2002, that 4 years later we'd lose MJ. But it's become his legacy, and something which helps other people. And I think if any of these things, one of perhaps the the one takeaway for all of us in the room, if you can share your story, and we found it hard to talk about this stuff for a long time, but if you can share your story and just speak from the heart as well as the head and change the life for one person, then you do good.
Through Black Dog, there has been a lot of interest from sporting clubs. So it's funny how we're circling back to that sort of sporting clubs. And it's not just men, by the way, that are benefiting from the relationship between Black Dog and sporting clubs. A lot more women are playing sport, obviously, and they're recognising that at a national level. But obviously your research is not limited to men. But on this particular slide, we had some very big announcements this year in both rugby league and also in the AFL. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that picture in the MCG, or the two of them actually, aren't they? That's kind of wow to have had that experience.
Yeah, for sure. There's something called the Danny Frawley Centre. It's a Kilda football club in Melbourne. Danny Frawley was a captain, champion player for 9 seasons at St Kilda, and he then became a commentator. He became very well known in promoting good causes, and he sadly 5 years ago, having lived with Black Dog issues on and off through his life and having his head belted as well, he took his own life. And the Danny Frawley Centre was built by government and the club down there as a wellness centre, and they decided that they needed to partner with someone who was very involved with with mental health, and they chose Black Dog. And the Danny Frawley Centre is now part of Black Dog. It's run by Danny Frawley's son, Chelsea Frawley, and who does a magnificent job. We had this Spuds game at the MCG. His nickname was Spud because he grew up on a potato farm, and obviously in his memory now, the legend goes on and has become very big. 60,000 people turned up. The government, the feds promised and have actually now delivered on giving $2 million for this particular area of research to Black Dog.
We'll just touch briefly on the Ethics Centre. Simon Logstaff has been running it. You've been on the board, inaugural chair again, I think. That's an interesting sort of, it's not strictly related to mental health, but it's an interesting corollary, and there's lots of crossovers, aren't there, with that?
It's now clear there's a direct link between that stuff and mental health. And I think Australia, again, we kick well above our weight, not only in mental health, but I think in this space as well. Simon Longstaff is a philosopher, and he's devoted his entire life, not about proselytising, sermonising, or wanting to be a regulator, but simply about doing the right thing, taking a values-based approach. And he's got a big hairy goal, and I can share this with you. It's been a bit in the papers. We want to set up an Australian Institute for Applied Ethics, particularly promoting the teaching primary ethics, secondary ethics, tertiary ethics, as well as being an independent policy advisor to all arms of government. And I think we've got the University of New South Wales, the University of Sydney as partners, founding partners, and we've got letters of support now from the BCA, the Business Council of Australia, the AICD, Australian Institute of Company Directors, the ACTU and ACOS.
Oh, great.
So fingers crossed that the government decide that this is something worth backing and they can demonstrate. We had a big economic study done that the benefits to the country in GDP terms, if you could lift trust levels by just 10%, so to find across the board, you would increase the GDP of this country by something in the order of $45 billion per annum.
Through trust?
Absolutely. And the hard-headed economists at Deloitte and the rest of us had a reaction just like that. But it's becoming more and more evident. And there is a crossover here. There's no doubt there's a crossover.
Yeah, amazing. All right, we're coming to a close, ladies and gentlemen. Beautiful you and Nettie. Any final thoughts, Peter, on today's discussion, your summing up of your life so far, and what would be perhaps the number one message that you'd like us to go home with?
Oh, it's not my message, it's simply plagiarising Ben Crowe about vulnerability as a strength and a mindset. He did this video for Macquarie Bank during COVID. Sadly, it's no longer around, otherwise I'd highly recommend it. Talking about vulnerability, talking about attitude and mindset. And there are only two quotes in it, both of them from psychiatrists. One of whom, Scott Peck, wrote a book years ago called The Road Less Travelled. And you could sum it up in two sentences. One is simply that life is hard. But the second sentence, and the clincher, is once you accept that life is hard, life is no longer hard. So that's one takeaway. The second one is from a bloke, Irving Frankl, a Jewish fella who survived the Holocaust, Auschwitz, for about 5 years, I think. And at the end of it, he was asked to write his memoir. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote it in 7 days. And he said, in essence, the reason that I survived and was able to come through this was simply that I held on to the last of the human freedoms, namely my attitude, the ability to choose one's own way. So choose your own way, service above self, and thanks for having us.
Thank you.
My area that I've been working in is really the way technology transforms the human condition, really. And so very early on in the 1980s and 1990s, I worked on that growing thing called the internet, which everybody thought was going to save us, you know. And increasingly through the 2010s, 2020s, I've been watching this rise in the use of technology for mental health at the same time as this exponential rise in the harms and risks associated with it. So some of my research now is around social media Is it really going to hurt our kids? Should we be shutting down schools, that sort of thing? You know, I'm sorry, shutting down the accounts kids have, stopping kids using the internet and so on. But also I've been working with AI because it's a fantastic tool to do so many things, but of course it's associated with so much risk. So that's kind of where my research is at the moment, or my interests, and I mainly now do policy and advocacy around how we should be better looking after our children, what they should be learning in schools, how can communities work together to lower the risk of suicide and self-harm. In fact, there's such a high growing rate of self-harm amongst young girls now, and it's sort of adolescent girls are self-harming much, much more than they used to. We are in a situation with rising mental health problems anyway. And one of the things those girls said, which I think is quite helpful in terms of us, is we want people to talk to us, not judge us, not panic, you know, like, oh, we've got to rush to the hospital, you're self-harming. Actually talk to them and try and establish that sort of communication, to talk about why and so on. So there's a lot about communication. There's a lot that can be done in schools about communicating safely around self-harm and encouraging young people to seek help from their peers and teachers. You actually need teachers who are aware as well. So I think mental health programs in schools are a very good idea. There's things like aftercare. If somebody has made a suicide attempt, then they're more likely to attempt again. It's really important that our hospital systems are set up to be able to look after people, follow them up, see if they're okay, get them hopefully into some sort of health service environment. The other thing that seems to be the big thing, and it's due to consumers who have it and families who experience this, that there's this growing idea that there should be people in the community who run service, if you call it a service. I was hearing somebody here about the equivalent of a men's health group, but people, not suicide necessarily, but setting up structures where people who experience this sort of self-harm can actually go and find and talk to a community of people who know what it's like, you know, the carers who look after people and so on. There's many, many more things I could say, but just off the top of my head, I'd say those three are very critical.
No. Any other questions? Yep.
Just in the spirit of what you were saying about the ban on social media or the embargo for less than 16-year-olds, do you have a view on it's, I know it's early days and none of us know what's going to happen, but what are your views on it?
Well, I think parents are really grateful. That would be my first observation. But I do think it's actually a human rights issue, and I think that the evidence that we have, we've looked at many studies showing correlations between kids who are depressed and kids on social media. It's very weak. You know, taking away the social media is not going to actually make a huge difference, in my opinion, based on the evidence. There's also trials where they take social media away from one group and not the other group, and they compare them after 2 or 3 months, you know, in a randomised controlled trial, SIVO, right? And the result is that it's mixed. Sometimes it makes a difference and sometimes it doesn't. So my view about social media is I think that our whole society should all go on a social media ban rather than just the kids. But more than that, I think it is our life now. So it's up to the governments and other organisations to stop the tech companies as much as possible from allowing rubbish and AI-generated garbage and untruths on our social media channels.
And the other is, this is a really tough one, I think, Peter, but knowing everything you know now after all these years and having worked with the Black Dog Institute for so long, is there anything you could have done, do you think, that would have stopped your son, taking his life?
Back in MJ's time, there was just a handful of doors you could really knock on. It's over 20 years ago. Now there are 20 more doors. And sadly, the numbers are something like of people that give up. They call it's something like 60% of people with mental health issues. And they call it the missing middle. And part of Black Dog's responsibility and remit is to change that and bring that percentage down.